broadly speaking, we're in a much more sustainable position with the understanding and willingness to adjust capacity as needed, I think is much better than it was.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschavon of the Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
All right, so today we are speaking with John Heimlich, which I'm sure many of you will recognize the name. You've probably seen his presentations. So John is currently VP and Chief Economist for Airlines for America. Prior to that, he was chairman at the Consumer Energy Alliance. He also spent some time at United Airlines as a manager for regulatory affairs. And then he was also a business systems analyst at American Management Systems. He's got a BA from Cornell University and a master's of public policy and transport economics from Harvard, JFK School of Government. So, another smart guy for us to talk to, as always. But it should be fun. He's a great guy. He knows his stuff. So it'll make for a good conversation. So, John, this is your time on wing.
A quick disclaimer for all podcasts before we start. The opinions you're going to hear expressed today are personal, and those of Garrick, myself, the guest, shouldn't be relied on as fact or as professional advice. This applies specifically to any mentions of public companies and matters not in the public domain. We haven't verified every statement, so please treat this as the candid conversation that it is.
So before we get on with our guest, which you guys are going to absolutely love, we obviously, first of all, we want to thank all our listeners for listening to us and making the show what it is today. And we certainly welcome any of you to, whenever you see us at conferences, just please say hello. And we'd love to hear that you guys are listening and fans of the show. As you all know, we do run businesses. And so from my end at Collateral Verifications, on the appraisal side, all right, obviously, if you have any needs when it comes to aircraft, engine, landing gear, you name it, right? Just please feel free to reach out. I'm very approachable. I'm happy to chat about any kind of projects, and we'd love to work with you on a variety of things. We do have some publications out there as well. I do Turbine Aircraft Guide, Turboprop Value Guide. I've got the Aircraft Rating Tool. So there's various publications that we put together that can kind of help you on your day-to-day. Great reference points. So definitely, kind of reach out to us, and we'd love to chat and kind of start that relationship with you.
Okay, back to the show.
So, John, look, thank you very much for being on the podcast with us today. It's great to have you on, and as we do with all of our guests, we'd love to hear kind of how everybody got their start in aviation. There's usually either some kind of great story, or sometimes we get it was just by luck and I didn't really want to be in aviation, but here I am. So, but in any case, I think you've got a pretty good background. So I'm guessing there's hopefully some decent stories behind that, but I'll let you kind of just let us know where the passion came from and how you got started.
Yeah, well, thanks guys for having me on the show. It's a thrill, an honor. I was probably like you guys, kind of been, I'd fly with my parents as a kid and press my head against the airport glass and look out and see what was going on the ramp. And I remember my mom telling me, when the ground vehicles start moving, that probably means the plane's coming soon. So I was intrigued by that. And my first flight, I think, was from Cleveland to Fort Lauderdale to visit my grandma. That's the one I remember. And I this concept, we were going to land on the roof, or if it's 4 years old, we were going to land on the roof of her building. I didn't know what was going on, right? And then I didn't understand it was this airport to airport thing. And then my mom said, look out the window, there are palm trees. And that's how the sort of miracle started. It never occurred to me, though, that I have a career in the space. Never. I was undecided for a long time. And actually, I went to grad school for master's in public policy, and a friend of mine, a classmate, whose father had worked for Northwest Airlines, first in India and then at O'Hare, had told me, he knew I had an interest in the airline industry generally. We had talked about it. And I was taking a class at the business school, and he told me, we were crossing paths in the business school courtyard one day, and he told me that United was having an information session. I was recruiting at Harvard Business School. And I said, oh, thanks for letting me know. And I went in the Career Center and I looked up, I looked at the board and it said, the recruiters contact Jim Reinott. Now, many of you might know the name Brian Reinott. Brian is Jim's son, when Jim at the time was the recruiter for United, working in human resources. And I remember calling Mr. Reinott and saying, "Hey, I'm at the Kennedy School. I'm not at the business school, but I'm really, really interested." And he said, "Great, we're having an information session, October, whatever. Come on by." And I remember I had my Navy suit, my suspenders, and my resume. And I sort of stood out in this crowd because I think at that time, most of the business school folks didn't have a genuine interest in airlines, and they were going to Wall Street or tech or whatever. And I think that worked to my advantage, and I got an interview. And by Thanksgiving, I had a job following my graduation. I was one of the first in my class to have that. And I was so excited to go work for United. So that's how it was a stroke of luck that, but by spreading the word that I had this interest, my friend knew to tell me about it, and that's how it all started. So I was at United from August 96 to March 2001, and came here to our association, and April 2nd will be 25 years here. So I like to tell people I started with a full head of hair, which is true. So.
Yeah, that's the traditional aviation story too.
Yeah, right.
Especially when, you could probably, maybe you should do this, count your career by the number of crises that aviation's been through.
Yeah. Yeah, because let's see, so you said you started in April of 2001?
April 01.
Yeah, right. So
Great
before
timing.
Yeah, it's funny. So I started my career on the commercial side at CIT Aerospace in May of 2001. And
okay.
And that so I mean that was
baptism by fire for sure.
Yeah, and then 9/11 happened and we were all like, "Oh, got it."
Yeah. And I remember deciding to hold on to my United ESOP shares, which didn't work out too well. But so I tell some of my friends, "Hey, I escaped United, just in time before the bankruptcy, and then I came to ruin the whole industry." So that was kind of the joke. So,
what role did you have at United?
So I started in FP&A, financial planning, and then the analysis side, and then I spent a couple of years in our international regulatory affairs group, which was basically route cases, mergers, competition guidelines, antitrust immunity, where I was basically a liaison between the regulatory side of the house and the commercial side. So I would work with network planning and revenue management. We spent a bunch of time defending our alliance with Lufthansa and SAS in the EU,
which was quite new around that time. Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was fairly new. I remember working on the ATI application with Air New Zealand. I was still there I worked on the European approval of the United US Airways merger proposal. There were a bunch of perimeter rule cases, and of course this was still in the relatively early days of open skies, so a number of root cases, Brazil and I think Shanghai and others come to mind. But it really, the combination of the finance training and kind of the regulatory side was just great training for what I do now. And to tell you, it is small. I mean, I overlapped at Marty St. George, Daniel Schurz, Monty Brewer, all these folks. And then Mark House, Mike Whitaker. Mike was actually, when I went to the regulatory affairs group, it was first Cyril Murphy, who had come from Flying Tigers and FedEx. And then Mike Whitaker took the job, and of course he became FAA administrator. We're still in touch, but it is a very small world. I overlap, actually from our HRIF meeting, Richard Wynn was there from Boeing. Richard and I overlapped a year. So it's really, that's what I love about the business, is all the cool, interesting, passionate people you meet, and it just touches so many facets of life. So.
Yeah. So what made you transition from United to Airlines for America?
I had so in my second year, all the students, we had to do a paper as a policy analysis exercise. If nothing else reveals my geekiness for aviation, my paper was on aviation tax policy.
Sounds riveting. I know. Yeah.
And actually, so that was 95, 96, and then 97. I don't know how long your memories are. We had the big ticket tax battle going on, and my director in financial planning is like, I know the perfect person for this assignment. So I worked on that. I guess ultimately, so I had done the paper. We needed a client, and my client actually was my current employer. So I worked closely with my predecessor, Dave Swearinga, and then the head of government affairs, Ed Merlis, on the paper. And I had a classmate we worked on together, and I had loosely stayed in touch. And at some point, there wasn't a clear path for me at United. And we were still in the suburbs, Elk Grove, Des Plaines. We weren't in the city of Chicago, and I was still a fairly young guy. And Dave Swearinga called me one day and said he was thinking of a 5-year, kind of retirement path and was looking to groom someone to be a successor. And this conversation, was probably, it would have been in 2000. So, 9/11 around the corner, we didn't know, but Dave ended up being there about 3 more years, not 5. But I said, well, geez, if I hadn't, just been promoted, bought a condo, I might have been interested in. And then he had his boss call me, and the conversation started to get a little more serious. And I had lived in the Washington area between college and grad school and had some comfort here. And I think there was a more clear upward path. There's a possibility to become chief economist. It was more big fish, small pond instead of the other way around. And so it was the combination of factors that seemed career-wise and promotion-wise and just lifestyle-wise. All roads led here. So 25
and the
years.
The position was in DC, right?
In DC, yeah. So it was a move, and I was doing a reverse commute, which isn't really such a thing in Chicago because it's equally bad in both directions, it turns out. But it got me out of that and a chance to live in downtown Washington and kind of reset my social life. And I just remember when I got here, and everything, like 90% of the discussion was about runways and building more runways. And there was a plan, I forget, it was like 50 miles runway, 25 airports, something. But boy, did that conversation change 6 months later.
Yeah, in a heartbeat. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, because I remember
now it's like 90% air traffic control. So here we are.
Yeah, but even back then you were still having congestion issues, right? I think if I remember,
just different ones.
Sure.
Right. It was still.
But it was heavily airfield and less about controller staffing or equipment modernization.
Okay, so this is fascinating. I'm curious to see how far you can take this. But you show up, the big kind of challenge is finding runways. Now we're talking about ATC. Can you follow through your career, like what's kept you up at night at each segment? I would assume 9/11 and security impacts shortly after that, but kind of take us along this path of just all the various projects that you've focused on over the years.
So yeah, sure, 9/11, and then there was a big effort to get the Stabilization Act implemented, get the money actually out the door, it wasn't just the law passed and okay, all these direct deposits come. Everyone, it was arduous, and there was a lot of rulemaking, and that was true on the cash side, that was true on the loan guarantee side, and working through all that. And then yes, we had the security regime and the cost of compliance and how much the industry should be paying to support TSA and that whole thing of ASIF fee and the 9/11 fee and how that should be structured and all those sorts of items. And then, we always used to talk about the hassle factor. And that was part of what drove Southwest, of course, to change its average stage length was a value proposition at the short end, among other factors over time, of course. But it's a lot of transformation. Then we had the Iraqi war and the cockpit door reimbursements, and that was a project. Oh, I skipped over. Well, no, maybe it was a year later. We had SARS, which was 2004, I think, spring.
That was fun. That was just a cute little almost pandemic.
Yeah, right. And I remember looking at bookings to Hong Kong and certain parts of Canada versus the rest of Canada, and we were doing all those comps. And along the way, there were a number of data projects. So, the reporting by cause of delay and all that BTS stuff and O&D modernization round 2, depending on how you define it, like 2005, and then the rule got pulled. And I spent a lot of time on that the last several years again. But I think 06, we had the liquids scare, liquids ban.
Oh, that was from the toothpaste guy.
2006, I think, was, and things changed. But the big thing, we had 07, 08, we had the fuel shock, right? So we had China's incredible growth. We had a kind of a flood of speculation into the market for oil, and the oil prices went through the roof. There was a lot of panic, and certain analysts write certain things and they're etched in your brain forever. And I still remember Jamie's predecessor, Sam Buttrick. I have to note, the industry was not built for $40 oil.
Oh, the travesty.
And now we think about 40 sounds pretty good, right? But
and oil's not high now even.
No, right, exactly. By modern standards, once you've been 147 and back,
Yeah.
But it did result in a lot of positive change, of course, and but the fuel shock, that was kind of like, I just remember my heart leaping out of my chest. We were under a lot of pressure on that issue, and then of course the Great Recession was super rough, and then I remember we got pounded by consumer advocates. We had the 4 years of $100 crude, roughly speaking, 11 through 15. And then I think it was toward the end of 14 or 15 that it came down fairly rapidly. And, if oil's down, why aren't your fares immediately down? But people forget it's kind of sticky on the way up and sticky on the way down. And there's usually kind of a 6-month lag of adjustment. And of course, when they were going up really rapidly, none of them wrote us and say, how come you're not raising your fares quickly to match oil price? But when they come down, you get pounded. And
I blame the airlines for this a little bit as well, mostly the international airlines. There's still like a $800 fuel surcharge to fly on BA across the Atlantic.
Oh, wow.
So if you're a passenger and you see, still it's market pricing, they're just kind of dividing it in different ways. But you see an $8 or an $800
it's labeled
fuel
explicitly
surcharge.
as fuel.
Yeah, it's labeled explicitly, yeah. And I was looking at an award ticket, so I don't know if actual bought tickets have that as well. But I thought, okay, if fuel's coming down and you told me that that's why I'm paying this much, then where's my money?
Yeah, so that was a whole battle, and then we had when I think of, that the whole time the ultra low cost segment was growing rapidly, but it seemed particularly acute in the 16, 17, 18 kind of, or at least where they got some very established market share and nationwide presence, and there was an adjustment there, and I'm trying to think of some of the other
Well,
issues in
COVID
that
shortly
time.
thereafter, right?
Well, yeah, I hadn't quite gotten there yet. But yeah, of course, the pandemic. I was thinking about the first Trump administration. There were some things we dealt with. But yeah, and then that COVID hit there. And then under Secretary Buttigieg, there was, constant, we played a lot of defense. And there was a very active regulatory DOT. But we've had things come up. You may be aware of, Irish Aviation Authority trying to cap the number of annual passengers at Dublin. And so one thing we do as a body, sometimes we litigate. We can litigate in the U.S., we litigate overseas, or join IATA in lawsuits. And I think so far we've prevailed. By the way, I skipped over a whole bunch of environmental. Occurs to me, like even in the mid 2000s, the Waxman-Markey legislation on carbon limitations, we did a bunch of analysis on that, and I've been involved in the sustainable aviation fuel run up and running scenarios and advising on what things could work at federal level, state level, international, and what's the effect of mandates in Europe and on SAF. And we've we get involved. David on my team has been involved in this local DCA Longbridge project with the rail and costing out. So they put these. There's a good project to increase rail capacity. There's a bottleneck, the Virginia, DC, Maryland crossover, which affects a lot of the Eastern Seaboard rail throughput. So it's a good project that they're trying to put this through. But in the meantime, they have to put up a bunch of cranes, and it affects operations and the takeoff patterns, and it restricts payload, restricts quite a bit of seating, especially in the summer times when it's hot. So we've done some analysis to not to oppose, but actually the Virginia Secretary of Transportation was interested in working with us to, once they better understood the economic impact, on us to help work with the rail folks and the construction firms to mitigate, the time of day of the construction and the height of some of the cranes.
Is this DCA or BWI
DCA.
or
DCA really? Yeah. So it's local. Just an example of there are things all over the world that Latin America is, I think, an increasing area of regulatory interest. But so the pandemic and getting the O&D stuff out, seeing that through the finish line, which is great. That's just been released, and we're working with the department to go in the next few months and then get them to a regular schedule and working out a few kinks. But I would say that was a very successful collaborative effort to get something modern that also the carriers would find useful but not overly burdensome or overly revealing to put out. We spent a lot of time on that. And there's some really excellent people at the department we work with on that. So that was enjoyable. And we've been fighting, speaking of BA, but not BA per se, we worked with outsiders to do a whole study on the costs of the increase in the UK air passenger duty, which is a significant part of your ticket and is on a annual escalation track. It's pretty darn high. So I don't know if it's as high as that fuel surcharge, but it's up there. So these things come and go all the time. There's issues in Canada. State fuel taxes. There have been a number of state and local labor issues. The LA minimum wage, living wage ordinance, and they wanted to ramp up to $30 an hour by the time of the Olympics, and sort of the platinum family healthcare plan. I mean, a lot of our guys already had kind of the gold or silver, but and you hear about some of these low-cost guys retracting from LA and other places, and you do the math, and you can understand why. So that's the last couple of years, a lot of monitoring where the controller staffing issues are, where the choke points are, and doing whatever we can to support the quest for the resources and commitment to get this done in an efficient manner.
What is this in that regards? I mean, what is kind of the objective of the projects, that, as much as you can share, that you're working on the ATC side?
Well, first, number one, staffing. Get them adequately staffed, which maybe that degree of staffing, the necessary footprint changes over time, but at least staff it to your current, equipage, current demand levels, and get a commitment to move to a common automation platform so the various legacy systems that talk to one another don't have to be dialed down in speed to be compatible with the others. I think it's more like it's done in Europe and Canada. And, getting from paper flight strips to electronic, and making sure that the controllers have modern facilities to work in where the elevators work. There aren't sewage backups. There's not a sump pump running all day just to suck water out of the center because it was built on a floodplain. And I think there's some people don't understand that the recruiting problem. It's one thing to say, okay, you grew up with an iPad, but you're going to work with this ancient technology and displays that are tiny and inadequate. But it's another to say you're going to work in a building that's not really that nice a place to work. And I think in an ideal world, they would consolidate the number of facilities, and you would, rather than have a lot of mediocre facilities, you'd have a handful of really state-of-the-art.
Yeah, one big
facilities.
sump pump, right?
Yeah, one big sump pump. Super pump. Yeah, I like that.
Super pump. Yeah.
Wasn't that the movie? There was that series about Uber, Super Pumped. I think that.
Where do things, kind of in the grand scheme of things, on the ATC side, which is not a conversation that Garrick and I have often, so it's great to have the expert on. Where are we in that kind of overall situation in the U.S.? Are things getting better? Are we still kind of on the front end?
I think they are. I think I've got a glimpse at some controller numbers, and I think they're definitely making some progress on staffing. The challenges that they were, 2,500, 3,000 short, and going net up 100, 150 it's great, but it's only a start. So that's good. I think, there was just some hoopla about DCA tower converting from paper strips to electronic. So those things are happening. And I know, I think they've made some good progress on replacing a lot of the copper wire telecom infrastructure with fiber cables, particularly in the Northeast, and changing out the displays. I haven't been privy to the latest presentation, but I understand, Brian Bedford does kind of a road show, and I think he's pretty confident about how far along they are. And, the 12 billion or so, or 12 and a half, that initial chunk that came from Congress was a great start. But really, I think the holy grail is this common on an automation platform and digitization. So I think it's going well. It's ambitious to do it on the time frame they want to, but what we've all said is really just no one in the aviation community, really the economy, can afford to fail. This needs to be a priority. Look, I mean, part of it is about averting safety risk, right? So there's modernization for efficiency's sake, but the thing that happened at Newark it was May last year, I think, right? You can't have displays go out for a few seconds.
Right.
The communications go down. That's very, very scary. And we've all read about near misses and incursions, and so staffing matters, giving the controllers the right tools to do their job, and trying to go from 8 different types of radar, many of which are so old that the people who know how to repair them are no longer alive. I mean, simplification of one, it's easier to maintain. We don't want them to have to buy parts on eBay, which they've talked about. And there are a lot of good reasons to do that. And as you know, at some point you get a new car. You just stop throwing money at an old car. It's actually we talk about the money to do this, but there's also a lot of money spent to maintain old stuff. And at some point, that economic equation changes, and you got to think it's time for the new stuff, and maybe I don't need as many to accomplish the same job. Just to give you one example from the mid 2000s, I don't know, it was 05, 6, 7, somewhere in there. You know, there was there used to be a TRACON in Boise, Idaho, and FAA pushed to have it consolidated into the Salt Lake City TRACON. And that Salt Lake City facility, which I think was higher tech, could have a sort of a broader purview of jurisdiction and visibility. And to FAA's credit, they thought this was a good idea. It eventually did prevail. But where do you think the opposition came from? It came from an Idaho senator. It's just jobs, and this is the challenge. We have 2 en route centers in Texas. I'll leave it to you to determine whether you think that's for aviation reasons or non-aviation reasons.
That sounds like a very Texas thing to do.
I'm not proposing we get rid of it. I'm just saying we hope they look at the system holistically and do what's right for the system as a whole. That's what, and get the best bang for the buck.
Yeah.
It sounds oddly, I'll make up a word here, Amtrak-esque, where there are clear inefficiencies, but nobody wants to be the one to take the impact of the inefficiency. So you have local representatives or senators who need the rail service through their constituencies. It's interesting. I hadn't heard this from the perspective of TRACONs before.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very tangible example. And, FAA takes a lot of hits on stuff, but there are things they've tried to do where they just get blocked. I mean, another example many years ago was, I think it was the Oklahoma training facility. I think there were, in an adjacent state, I can't remember if it was Missouri, or Kansas, but there were like 10 accountants for FAA, and they wanted to consolidate the real estate and move them into the Oklahoma City training facility and just shut down that real estate cost. Got blocked by I can't remember if it was successful or not ultimately, but there was a lot of resistance. I mean, I guess those 10 votes were that important. And you know how it works with with moving controllers, right? This whole issue of moving folks from Long Island to Philadelphia or what. It just gets very, very contentious and trades are made. But the point is that our air navigation service provider, which is FAA, doesn't have carte blanche to optimize. And also, or to spend. I mean, sometimes they're congressionally directed to deploy an instrument landing system at a particular airport that almost no one uses. And you say, is that the best use of scarce resources? Especially if the agency year after year after year is only getting $3.5 billion in what we call F&E money, facilities and equipment. It's basically their capital budget. And if you think about how much, our guys are spending on planes in a single year. And you think, if you constrained our industry to $3.5 billion a year in capital expenditures, you wouldn't see many state-of-the-art airplanes coming up.
Yeah. John, can you go just real briefly for our listeners that may not necessarily know exactly what Airlines for America do?
Oh, sure.
Can you just go through briefly kind of like what you guys focus on, what you do? Because obviously it seems like it's very broad in terms of the airline industry, but I'd love to get a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so we're an industry body like the Motion Picture Association or American Petroleum Institute, American Trucking Association, and all these that standard industry body, which represents a number of dues-paying companies in that sector, American Medical Association, doctors, and so forth. And we serve as a forum to develop industry standards, sometimes safety standards, parts exchange, on airport fuel quality, handling, those, a variety of things. Even there's a cyber standard now, I think. But we also do communications and forecasting market research. So, for example, we just put out our spring holiday forecast, which David's the man on, and it's all our holiday forecasting. So when people say the industry is projecting X amount of traffic over the period, that's what we do, where, instead of a reporter or a politician calling multiple companies and asking them for their individual projections, which of course they wouldn't disclose, we do that. But obviously our main thing is advocacy, which can be as mild as education of policymakers, Hill staffers, media on an issue, to as aggressive as litigating. Could be state, local, foreign, on an issue. But basically our board of directors, by the way, we were established in 1936 in Chicago. I got here in 1938. No, just kidding. I joined in '01, but our board is composed of the CEOs.
01, right, John?
Yeah, 19. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So just pre-Orville.
Yeah.
Pre-Orville. That's right. You knew something had to be
Coined
done.
the term.
Yeah.
The pre-Orwellian days.
Our board is the CEOs of our member carriers. We have 6 U.S. passenger airlines, 3 cargo airlines, which a lot of people don't know: Atlas, FedEx, and UPS. And we also serve the interests of the cargo efforts of our passenger carriers. And we have Air Canada, what's called an associate member. I think when I started, we had about 22 members. Now we have 9. We had Revolution Airways and Midwest Express and Aloha and a lot of brands that are no longer with us. So,
yeah.
We have committees and councils of experts: engineering, safety, security, law, government affairs, and so forth. And it rolls up to the board, and we help set policy direction. What do we want to say about this? What do we want to advocate for? Or we'll draft industry comments or press release, and sometimes they'll review it and they'll shape it. And do we want to endorse something? Do we want to applaud something? What do we want in the FAA reauthorization bill? Do we want to sue the Irish Aviation Authority for limiting traffic in Dublin? And they literally vote on these items. And they also, do we want to make a SAF commitment? And what should that be? What should it look like? And carbon neutral? And do we want to take a voluntary approach in California on things, or have a more aggressive posture? And most recently, we had a voluntary agreement on sustainable aviation fuel, and there's ground equipment and all these issues. So we're an advocacy organization, education, but it's things where our members have a consensus position.
Okay. Yeah. And so I guess anybody that is operating in the U.S. would join basically Airlines for America? Is that kind of the...
They could. I mean, they would have to be willing to pay our dues and be approved by the other board members to become a new member. So historically, some of the cargo folks, some of the charter companies, and the regionals, the ultra low cost, they've had their own separate associations.
Okay.
But we collaborate on many things. I think for a lot of the low cost ones, the dues are prohibitive. That's one issue. But, and by the way, as I was talking and thinking about our committees, I failed to mention the whole 5G issue, which wasn't a major factor for the economics team, but it is still very much an issue because it continues to expand, and the number of players, the strength of the signals over time, I think, getting stronger. And it went from a nightmarish crisis to, it was kind of going to be the opposite of next gen. It was going to make it much, much worse in terms of the restrictions we were under. And, I think my understanding is former FAA Administrator Steve Dixon, as you know, he was a top pilot himself. And I think he actually wrote the rule like himself. I mean, he knew about avionics. He knew about the 5G issue. And there were going to be he appropriately had a very conservative outlook on it, how we could maintain safety. And it was a degree of caution that was going to be very unpleasant for our customers and us. So we helped force the issue up to get the FCC and DOT and the National Economic Council to talk to each other, and we turned up the heat. And I think now we have a good working relationship with those agencies as well as the telecom companies themselves. And now there are questions about rebates for equipment, because one of the key issues is, or as I understand it, it's pretty clear. Well, first of all, the manufacturers didn't have available the avionics that were sufficiently precise to do what we needed. To some degree, they do, but some of the things that need to be developed will take years. So we had to say, hey, at least give us time to do this. And then the other issue is because it seems like we're not going to get any incremental benefit from the only benefit we're going to get is avoidance of conflict with the 5G signal. We're not going to get better navigation or less fuel burn or anything. So because of that, I think the understanding is we get some mitigation payments of some sort, but I don't know if that's all. That's above my pay grade and not something I've been working on. But our engineering team and my boss and others have been very active. But that was a very hot, very big issue.
Yeah.
And that was interfering, was that like a radar altimeters? Or?
Yeah, exactly. With the radar altimeters, yeah. The C-band. My understanding is basically it's the telecom guys were never in this directly adjacent spectrum to us. And once they bought that spectrum from the government in auction, there was, because our instruments weren't as precise, it would kind of overlap the bands and threaten to interfere with our radio altimeters. But that's as technical as I can go, I think. So
I don't know. It's more technical than I am.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got a colleague, Justin Madden, who's just terrific. He was a longtime Southwest mechanic. His predecessor, Bob Ireland, was an engineer, but they're all over this. Bob retired, but did a ton of work on this issue before he retired. He spent a lot of time at United and Boeing, and a lot of our technical people tend to be former airline or former military at times.
And do you have a good amount of interaction with the OEMs as well, based on kind of some of the issues that you're seeing with the airlines, or is that?
I mean, not so much for me, but definitely in engineering and maintenance, and then sometimes policy, government affairs. Certainly on the safety side, cybersecurity, and those more technical areas. There tends to be where those discussions are. Well, I have some.
Yeah, nice.
Okay, so over the 25 years, I'm doing the math right?
Yeah.
Coming up next month, right?
Yeah.
We've seen some things. You've seen some things. Really interested. I don't know how a better way to ask this than just to ask kind of what's the John Heimlich stamped state of the industry, kind of with the perspective of what you've seen. Like, how would you kind of describe where we are, the challenges, where we're doing great, just overall as an industry today?
Broadly speaking, not true for every brand, of course, but broadly speaking, we're in a much more sustainable position with much healthier balance sheets, and I think better able to commoditize, more agile in terms of fuel going up or down $20 a barrel at any given time, and being able to flex on that, and the understanding and willingness to adjust capacity as needed, I think, is much better than it was. Part of that is a function of the fleets and the better diversification of revenue streams to help us weather those storms. But I think it's also because a lot of the C-suites now and middle management are people who've been through some of these crises where they were so stress tested. And I think also learning how to deploy and leverage technology to get through some of these things. I think that'll be a big talk. The next push, I think, is really trying to squeeze more efficiencies from the technology side, because I'm trying to remember who I was talking to when we were this durability. Maybe it was actually John Kirby on our TRV panel, Courtney. But we were talking about the durability of the premium phenomenon, and I think John's comment was, it's really easy to adjust capacity and cabin configurations, but it's not easy to adjust labor costs. And that comment, stuck with me. So,
it's easy to adjust them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stroke of a pen.
Yeah.
That's true. It really depends. Look, of course, not every year is going to be as good for premium, and there's always going to be the bubble burst and a downturn. The question is always, how severe and for what duration. And, I think there are certain brands feeling that pinch right now, of course, and that's whether it's the pressure for some to merge, the pressure for others to shrink, or to keep their fleet size flat. We're seeing it in different forms. And, for now, the ones that are most exposed to the tailwinds are the ones that are in growth mode. So, but I think you're always, at any point in the course of this industry, you're going to have brands come and go. But I think that for the most part, we're in a far less vulnerable spot than we were in the 2000s or the 2010s.
People forget that. I mean, the obviously 9/11 was hugely impactful. COVID was hugely impactful. But in the U.S., the great financial crisis wasn't really, right? Because we were going through those bankruptcies
yeah. So we'd already taken the chin. Yeah.
Well, we were in the process of the chin taking. Like we were, we were just kind of in the middle of all that. And I think American was 2011. Yeah.
Yeah, November 2011, somewhere around that.
So yeah, I find that, your comment as well about, we have people who have seen these downturns. Well, we've had downturns worth seeing. I mean, that's terrible to say, but COVID was a major one. The GFC, while partially muted in the U.S., was impactful around the world, more financing focused. 9/11 was a big one.
I remember in my first couple of years at United, I had a project where I needed to collaborate with a guy in our IT group, and I remember talking to him, and he was talking about, so this is probably 96, 97, maybe 98. Well, this guy had been there probably 30 years, and he was talking about, in the past when we had furloughs and blah. I couldn't even get my head around the concept of furloughs. I'm this new kid out of grad school, like, furloughs? What are you talking about? And like, to him, the early 90s was not a distant memory, right? I couldn't even fathom that United could get to a point where they would have to furlough people. I mean, it was so foreign to me. And that's so different than these people I'm talking about who've lived through 3 or 4 massive crises, who've, known how to pull these levers, and it's okay, we'll figure out a way to raise money, to prepare our balance sheet to be in a position to have the liquidity, and also to, obviously one big thing about COVID was we thought we had enough cash on the balance sheet, but we were wrong. This is not 2 times 9/11. This is 5 times, whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think just there is a lot to be said for experience.
Well, so not only that, but the next downturn will happen.
Sure.
And the last perspective was COVID, minus 97%. I get asked, I'm sure you get asked this all the time, what's the next downturn look like? And the answer is, if I knew that, I wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah.
I'd be on Polymarket. I did want to ask you about kind of looking forward. The U.S. in particular recovered from COVID, but is largely flat the last couple years, particularly in the domestic space. What's the first limit we would hit? So how much growth can the North American market, the very, very mature North American market, absorb? I'm thinking all the constraints, financial, traffic and demand, ATC, infrastructure. How much growth is there before we hit those constraints? And kind of what does that look like going forward, kind of in your mind?
Yeah, well, it depends on what kind of constraints you're thinking of. I mean, and if we think about the New York airspace, keep in mind we still have the slot waiver relief there because there aren't enough. FAA's acknowledged they don't have enough controllers, so those are still in effect. I think at least through this fall. I don't remember exactly, but it was a 1 or 2 year waiver, and we're still being asked to fly, or being offered the chance, to fly less than normally to keep those. There is still, I think they're still only, I don't know, 65, 70% staffed relative to their agreed upon FAA NACA target of what's right there.
Isn't that your home airport, Garrick?
What, Atlanta?
No, New York.
No, New York.
Oh, New York. Oh, JFK, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you think about other places, and you think about the growth happening in Austin and San Diego, and to some extent Seattle. It seems like less of an airspace constraint, and maybe just what the airport can handle. And some of those have big projects underway. And I think there are parts of the country, if we're talking about physical constraints, then there are pockets, but in aggregate, could the system-wide traffic grow? Sure. I think one interesting question for the U.S. is thinking about the broader economy is general population growth affecting domestic, which I've seen, CBO, the Congressional Budget Office for your audience, and Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, and others, a number of studies that our population growth has really slowed. It's birth rates, it's immigration. And then there's an outflow. There's emigration, right? I keep reading articles about Americans moving elsewhere. So it raises a question about how does that factor into our domestic growth forecasts? And I'm going to be, I don't know if either of you will make it, but this is going to be one of our topics for the TRB Aviation Research Symposium in Dayton, and how do demographics factor into our aviation forecasts. And so that's one issue. Constraints elsewhere, I don't know. You're right about the domestic market has been relatively flat, and I think carriers have seen some improvements in yields thanks to the traffic mix and the premium mix. And you're absolutely right. The international has been one of the levers, and of course loyalty has been a lever. And I think that is another big change aside from the balance sheets, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, is the state of diversification of the revenue streams, which helps you deal with some of that domestic traffic stagnation and some of those underlying cost pressures.
You say it so diplomatically. You must work in an organization.
I must. The years of brainwashing.
You call it diversity of revenue streams, which I think is genius. I call it finding an excuse to make money somewhere else so you can play with airplanes.
Hey,
either one works.
If you'd rather take it all in airfare, then I don't think you want that. So
right, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah. And it's not, loyalty is not the first, right? Ancillary revenues were probably the more kind of direct comparison.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that was obviously the catalyst. There was the fuel spike in 2008, and American was first out of the box there on the bags, and a lot of people think of that. They first think of incremental revenue, but I always thought the big thing was cost avoidance. So I am not going to prepare to check 400,000 bags if people only want to pay for 200,000 bags. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to overstaff, overequip, take lost time injuries from workers slinging bags, overbuild my bag space in the airport, the check-in lines. I'm not you're going to get, and the food, which to a large degree has come back, but if you give everyone remembers the old sandwich that if you all got it for free, wasn't that great, right? But now the quality is much better if you're willing to pay for it, and that shouldn't be surprising to anyone. So But I thought of a lot of it was especially on food and beverage or the bags is we're not going to incur the cost for something that people don't truly value. So I understand why there was a huge, adjustment period. But my understanding is the polling generally with the younger crowds is, well, that's what they've grown up with. They're used to it. So it's not as big a deal.
It's all about that expectation.
Yeah.
And like I say, don't surprise me. Just that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm taking my first flight on Frontier, which is because I've had no reason to before. And I'm worried about being surprised by just rules that I'm not expecting, right?
Well, maybe you'll have a lovely crew.
And I'm sure we will. But it's the unknown, right? Whatever. And the legacy carriers have gone through that. Southwest is surprising people now just because they changed their rules and they're going through some challenges as a result.
I mentioned something earlier about stage length, and that was part of Southwest transformation. And I think that's also, there's a connection there with the premium durability, which is as generally my impression is for a lot of carriers, stage length has increased, especially when you factor in the international mix or even the short haul Latin stuff. As you know, this made me think of your Frontier trip. I was wondering how long you were going to be on the plane. And as you know, the longer you're traveling and the more you care about your in-flight seat comfort, your Wi-Fi availability, your power ports. I mean, for me, I'm not a tall guy, so legroom isn't the biggest factor. For me, it's I want to plug my laptop in or my phone. I don't want to die of power. That's like more important than food. It's more important than legroom and some other things. So
more important than the oxygen mask? Right? As long as my computer can breathe.
Exactly. So I just one more email on the way down. Yeah.
2 hours is the answer. That's how long I am on that flight. And I'm not worried. I mean, just me personally, I'm not worried. I'm comfortable in economy. But what I find interesting in your comparison there, and I wholly agree with it, is the idea that look, we as humans are more willing to pay for amenities for the longer stage lengths because that's where we are longer. The problem is that the ULCCs have also been increasing their stage lengths, right? So they keep getting longer, which puts them more into
pressure
that
to
market,
compete on the product, Yeah, it's a conundrum, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just look, I remember, in the 90s, right? Everyone was envious of any airline that had the shuttle, right? The Northeast New York shuttle. It was and several airlines looked at purchasing those shuttles in the Northeast, and now it's a faint trace of what it was, but that's partly it was the whole hassle factor thing, but it's also just because things like Acela and the Bolt bus and Vamoose, they all just got so much better. It was not only like a decent ride, but they'd have Wi-Fi and you could actually conduct some business on the way. And so just don't.
I don't remember Wi-Fi being very good at all in the 80s on the shuttle.
Not in the 80s, but I'm saying...
No, we plugged in? Yeah. It was an old modem?
Yeah.
We did have the phones, though. Remember the earphones?
Your joke flew over my head.
Sorry.
That's all right. I got you now. So I'm allowed in the last few minutes of the interview.
Yeah.
80s, yeah.
Nice. Well, look, John, I know you're kind of running up on the hour there, so we won't keep you much longer. But this has definitely been fun in terms of different side of the industry, right? That you guys cover, something that's very important as well, right? Because you're kind of there to lead the way to make sure that airlines are getting their fair share and kind of being part of all the policy and everything else, right? So it's nice to have you on and kind of listen to your background.
Thank you so much. I do this because I love working with the members and with the external community like you guys and so many smart people, but I also just really believe in what we do in our role in the economy and with COVID and 9/11, I mean, anything I can do to save jobs or add jobs, I really get a lot of satisfaction from that. So that's what keeps me going. It won't be another 25 years, but hopefully more than 25 days. So.
No, listen, John, you already let the cat out of the bag. We know these Heimlichs live into their mid-90s, so you've got another 20.
That's right. That's right.
That's a perfect note to close on. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, John.
Yeah.
With me, as always, Garrick Deschavon of the Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who are we talking to today?
The collateral verifications, love it.
If I put the in front of it, it sounds more important.
It makes it more important.
There's one and only.
That's right. It's the Garrick Deschavon of the collateral verifications.